Thank you, Convener. Good morning, First Minister and Dr Smith. The first point is I'd like to say a thank you regarding the Waterfront Cinema, which is an independent cinema in my constituency, which we received £250,000 from the Independent Cinema Recovery and Resilience Fund. So thank you for that. In terms of the questions, I wrote to yourself, First Minister, on Monday. It was later in the afternoon. And I'm writing on behalf of some of the hospitality trade within the Inverclyde area, who had some discussions with them on Friday in an online format, who raised their concerns extremely strongly regarding the positioning of Inverclyde in Tier 3 as compared to what their perception would have been for Inverclyde to be in Tier 2. And certainly with the document that, and the tiering that was published last week, looking at the indicators, Inverclyde had levels 1 and 2 in the various categories, apart from the present level, which put Inverclyde into Tier 3. And I think we all accept, also we are part of NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, but with the ICU forecast being at 2, then there was a sense of frustration as to why Inverclyde would be placed in Tier 3 as compared to Tier 3, certainly to try to assist the hospitality trade to continue trading until the next review period is to take place. So I'd be grateful to try to understand some further information as to why Inverclyde would have been placed in Tier 3 as compared to Tier 2, please.
Gregor will want to say more about this. I would say, and this may or may not be a situation that is confirmed, or it might not be later in the week, I'm not sure we are yet confident about the stability of the situation in terms of just the raw indicators in Inverclyde, about whether they are, they look relative to the rest of Greater Glasgow and Clyde to be low, but are they sustainably low? Are they starting to drift up again? Or so there's some, there's some questioning there. There is also, and this was set out a bit more fully last week, there is just the geographical positioning of Inverclyde relative to surrounding areas that have higher levels of transmission. Clearly, we have travel restrictions in place. In terms of guidance, we are actively considering whether we give a legal underpinning in future weeks to these travel restrictions, and I'll probably say more about that at the review point next week. But whatever approach you take to travel restrictions, it relies on people abiding by them. You will always have a risk, and I don't mean to sound pejorative about human behaviour, but we have to recognise realities. If you have a geographic situation with Inverclyde versus other parts of Greater Glasgow and Clyde, with pubs and restaurants significantly different in terms of their operation to other areas, you pose a risk to Inverclyde of an importation of the virus. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm saying you have to have pubs closed in Inverclyde for as long as they're closed in Glasgow, but these things start to be a bit of a consideration. And then there is, if you take Inverclyde down a level, and I keep making this point because I think it is one that everybody always has to bear in mind, taking an area down a level is partly a recognition that it's going in the right direction, but we've got to guard against seeing it as a kind of neutral reward for that. It's not neutral. You increase transmission as you open up in a lower level. So would we be opening up risks of the virus spreading in Inverclyde when the people of Inverclyde are then dependent on hospital services across Greater Glasgow and Clyde that are under quite significant pressure? So going back to the convener's initial question, this is the territory that is much more judgment-led and therefore, by definition, a bit more subjective, and therefore, I understand by definition, harder for people to kind of get their heads around and understand. But it is really important that we take that broader contextual picture into account when reaching these decisions, because the decision about whether an area is in level 0, 1, 2, 3 or 4 has a big impact on what will happen with the virus. So if you're going to take an area down a level, you have to be sure that the increase in transmission that is likely to allow, everything else tells you that you can cope with that without things quickly running out of control. Gary, do you want to say more?
So I think we started off the session by talking about the holistic approach that we took when we were making these judgments, and some of them are very difficult. Inverclyde I would include in that basket has been one of the very difficult judgments that had to be made. And it's a good example of why that holistic approach is very, very important. Because had you looked at some of the data alone without actually the overall context, different judgments might have been made, particularly if you were stuck and locked into a mechanistic process. And I think that would have been a huge risk for Inverclyde that we may yet see play out in terms of the data that we're currently tracking in Inverclyde as well. One of the considerations which I think is really important here is that geographical positioning with high levels of infection surrounding the area really effectively on all its kind of land border sides just now. And that places it, first of all, at a much higher risk. And we know from experience in Inverclyde from the first phase of the pandemic that the communities there suffered really quite a disproportionate impact of the virus already. And yet we don't have confidence, and neither should we have confidence, that there is a level of immunity there just now that would protect them from subsequent infection in the future. And therefore that we know the characteristics of that community, both in terms of their age, their demography, and some of their life experience, that they may be susceptible to further rises in cases in the future. Again, all of these factors are taken as part of that holistic assessment when we're trying to make the, as I say, the very fine judgments about how do we safeguard the public health of that area first and foremost from the threat posed by COVID-19. Now, we continue to track the data in that area to make sure that we are aware of any changes. One of the points that I think has come out in some of the questions that we have answered today is that when you see the data on a piece of paper, it's a point in time that you're seeing the data from. What perhaps is much more important is to see that data in the context of the trajectory and the intelligence that comes from the public health communities in particular. Because once you place it into that context, a raw data that is on a decreasing trajectory, you can be much more confident about than one which is either oscillating or even increasing. And where there's an area where there is that uncertainty and a lack of stability, I think it's right that the precautionary principle is applied and that we safeguard public health first and foremost.
I accept everything that's been said. I think the one aspect I would highlight, just in terms of the location and the geography, Dundee is in 3, Perth and Kinross is in 2. The distance between Perth and Kinross, the distance between Perth and Dundee is shorter as compared to Greenock up to Glasgow. So in terms of people potentially travelling either way, then the same argument could be used certainly for Perth and Dundee as compared to what was same with Inverclyde and elsewhere. And so that certainly adds to the aspect of the Tier 2 consideration for Inverclyde. Hasn't been fully considered or accepted as compared to elsewhere within Scotland.
These things are all fully considered and we will never be in a position where everybody's happy with the decisions that are reached. The precautionary principle here is important in terms of if there is uncertainty about the stability or the direction of travel of an area, particularly an area, as CMO has said, with a demographic picture that we know has heightened susceptibility. And particularly, I would say, with Inverclyde and the experience in the first wave of this, if you're asking me what side of that cautionary divide I think people in Inverclyde might want us to fall on, it's the one that says don't expose the population to higher risks of greater transmission that we judge to be safe at the moment. And I know that is difficult for businesses. I absolutely know that, particularly hospitality just now. But it is not, if we have the virus run out of control in all or part of Scotland, the restrictions that will end up being on business, including hospitality, will end up being more severe and possibly in place for longer. suppressing the virus is really important for health, for life, and for the sustainability of the economy. And it's also why, going back to the point earlier about, you know, how and who takes the final decisions on this, they're always going to be difficult. I can go into my email inbox, as I'm sure all of us can, on any given morning, and I will see, and these views are taken on their own terms, are all legitimate. I'm not arguing they're not, but I will have about the country as a whole, about different parts of the country, about schools, about pubs, about all sorts of things. I'll have people saying shut them, I'll have people saying open them, and all sorts of gradations in between. And we have to come to the balanced decisions on this, which are really difficult. What I would say, and I don't say this because I could be sitting here this time next week and the picture could look very, very different. There is no part of me that is complacent about any aspect of this. But the decisions that we have taken so far, some of them will not have been right. I hope most of them have been generally right in a difficult situation. But we're in a position right now where, relative to many other countries, we're not, I don't think anybody could describe their position on COVID as good, but we're in a less bad position. So that says to me that that cautious, precautionary approach has probably served us not too badly, and we should continue with it. Because I think longer term, that possibly takes us to where we all want to get to, maybe more quickly, but with less loss of life and less general damage to the economy than doing it in a different way.
Thank you. Can I just ask one brief question? After the decision has been taken in terms of a tiering, is there some type of either verbal or written briefing sent to the local authority and the health boards as to why those decisions have been taken?
We published this last week, the kind of brief statement of reasons. Obviously, we will communicate more detail to local authorities, and you know, we'll try and make as much information available as we can about what drives those decisions. The difficult bit of all of this is and I think this will develop as we go further into this kind of approach. The difficult bit is explaining as clearly as we all want to some of the more subjective and less tangible in a data sense factors that lie behind some of these decisions.
Okay, thank you.